Our daughter came home from school the other day, and I asked her how it went, and she let us know that she had to put what they call a workstation around her desk, and it was to keep others from looking at her paper, or that's the version she tells. Maybe it was to keep her from looking at others' papers. But do you remember that in grade school? Where your desk was right next to another person and you were maybe taking a test or exam. And if you were anything like me, you might peek over to check your neighbor's work to see how they were doing with it. Not that you wanted a copy or cheat, but we wanted to see how they were doing it, or at least that's the story we would tell. So we would construct these massive folder forts to protect our intellectual property. And if you were anything like me, it was kind of the awful day because you wouldn't be able to check in on your neighbor's work. Well, sometimes we like to still check in on our neighbors, and it has nothing to do with our homework anymore, but just kind of in a sense of judgment, if we're honest. We love to compare ourselves to others, don't we? Now, some people struggle with comparing themselves and it makes themselves feel bad, but most people, when they compare themselves, they pick a target that's maybe not doing as well as them, at least in this area of life. So, in the business world, maybe someone who's a few rungs down, or in physical health, someone who's not as healthy, or in marriage, someone who's struggled a little bit more. And we like to compare ourselves to people who's maybe struggled a little bit more because that can make us feel a little bit better. But whether it's in school or in life, you and I do better to keep our eyes on our own paper, so to speak. At least that's what Paul says in Romans 12. That's today's verse of the day. There he writes this: Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment. I love that idea from Paul. Sober judgment. Not thinking of yourself more highly than you ought, but thinking of yourself soberly before the Lord. Because if you've been around someone who's been intoxicated, drunk people make a lot of bad decisions. They think of themselves more highly than they ought. They overestimate their skills or ability when it comes to driving a car, or maybe physical conquests, or having being able to get a date. A drunk person's judgment is terrible. And Paul says, I want you to look at yourself with the judgment of a sober-minded person, someone who thinks soberly, who has sharpness, who considers all the factors. He wants you and I to keep our eyes on our own paper, to look in the mirror, and then to look at Christ, the perfect one, and to think soberly how we're doing in comparison to Christ as our example. So today, my question for you is simple. Are you looking in the mirror, or are you looking at your neighbor's paper? Are you thinking of yourself with sober judgment and trying to move towards Jesus? Or are you thinking of yourself with unsober, drunken thoughts and thinking of yourself more highly than you ought? Maybe because you're not looking in the mirror, but you're just looking at someone else. My thought is, if we keep our eyes on Jesus, it brings a whole lot of sobriety when we look in the mirror, because we see ourselves in light of the perfect one.